Welcome to my 10-year anniversary bonus video. It was just about a week ago when I realized that the 10-year anniversary of from the day that I created my YouTube channel was coming up, so I decided to do a bonus video. It was December 13th, 2012 when I created my YouTube channel and uploaded my first video. And I did an intro video to my channel and to the Retro Duo Portable. That was video number 1. So I decided to put this video together, and I spent pretty much all week putting it together, pretty much just before going to work, because I usually get up like 3 hours before I have to work, so I spent a little time every morning on this, and then having the weekend off I ended up having more time to put into it, so I decided to do a slideshow of my autobiography with video games. So the very first game I had ever played, or I should say the very first console I ever played, was the Atari 2600, and this was back in like probably 85 or 86. I was born December 24th of 1976, so I was born less than a year before this console was released. And my two friends I had, my two very first friends, were my sister Jody, who was born a year after me, and then there was Rhonda, who was the same age as me. She had a grandma that owned a duplex 3 houses away, and her grandma lived in the downstairs. The upstairs was fully furnished, but nobody lived there. She used it kind of like as a guest house whenever she had visitors. Well, Rhonda used to spend weekends at her grandma's house and the entire summer vacation. And since nobody really stayed upstairs, that's where her grandma decided to put the Atari, so we got to play many games up there. My first game was Pac-Man. Very first game I had ever played. This game got a lot of criticism, but because the arcade game was so much better, but when I played this game for the first time, I had never played the arcade game, so I really didn't know the difference, so I always enjoyed this game. And then that Christmas, Jody and I wanted our own Atari 2600, so we got one, and some of the games we had were Astro Blast. There's the little ship here. You just shoot all these rocks that are kind of like moving in different directions. And there was E.T. and this game was pretty famous for being called the worst video game of all time, but I always liked the game. It was just unique, and it was the first game I had ever beat. I don't think I beat it on my own. I think, if I remember right, I think my cousin might have shown me how to beat it. There was video pinball. There was this baseball game. I'm pretty sure this is the same one that I had. I did have a baseball game, but there were so many baseball games on the Atari 2600 that I can't remember, but I think I do recall the batter looking like the number 15. That's why I think this is the correct game. The one thing I couldn't figure out about this game is I'd put it in, I'd play, and the pitcher would not throw the ball. I couldn't figure out why not. It wouldn't be until sometime later I realized it's only a 2-player game, and we only had one controller. So eventually we got a second controller and plugged it in. Frogger is another game I remember. There was ice hockey. We only had 2 players on each team. Astro Blast. This one you got rocks falling down and you move back and forth, shoot them. And there was Missile Command. This one, what you do is you put this line, you got missiles dropping here, you got to put this line underneath these missiles and blow them up before they hit the ground. Many of these Atari games were similar, like asteroids and space and missiles and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, it is the Atari. The capabilities were limited. Cubert, another classic. Defender. Okay, then I had another friend, Faye. Him and I started hanging around in 2nd grade, which would have been 1984 or 85. But the first time I spent the night at his house was probably 85 or 86. And he had the Atari 5200. He told me it's better than the 2600. I mean, I really didn't know much about video games back then. I mean, it was more advanced than the 2600, but I mean, looking back at it now, according to units sold, the Atari 2600 sold 30 million. The 5200 only sold 1 million. But the only games I remember playing, here's Pengo. So you're a penguin, and I can't remember exactly what you do, but I think you kick blocks of ice around. I remember playing Popeye. Bluto's head looks like the number 5. And I had another friend who lived a couple doors down. She's more my sister's friend, Jody's friend, but I mean, they were best friends, but I still hung out with both of them. But this is Mattel and television that she had. And the games I remember playing on that are Pitfall. Now the Pitfall was released on both the Atari 2600 and the Mattel and television. I'm guessing it was probably most likely also released on the ColecoVision. The game was developed and published by Activision. And the only difference I could tell between the Atari version and the Activision or the television version of Pitfall are the numbers. The numbers on the Atari were more rounded, like the 8s, the 9s, the 6s, pretty much numbers that usually have more rounded ends on them. The Mattel and television were all like blocks. Here's another one I remember playing, Dungeons and Dragons. Now our friend Annie, her mom, we used to like watching her mom play this game. She was able to beat it. Because I mean, we're so young, we really didn't know what we were doing. Here's another one, Night Stalker. Okay, then the NES. So it's another night, me, Jody, and Rhonda were sitting at her grandma's house once again upstairs. She introduced us to the NES. This, I believe, was in probably the summer of '88. And the very first game I had ever played on the NES was Super Mario Brothers. Another game Rhonda had was Rad Racer. And she had Excite Bike. That Christmas, Jody and I wanted a Nintendo, so we ended up getting one. And we also got Super Mario Brothers and Excite Bike. Now that's not my NES. Many of these pictures I just pulled off the internet. So we also had Super Mario Brothers, played that many times. So I'm going to go through a list of the games we had. Adventure Island. This was a lot like Super Mario Brothers as far as, you know, being a side-scrolling platformer game. I noticed my sister Jody seemed to gravitate mostly towards these type of games. She really kind of like that style. Then we also had Excite Bike. Another game we had was Paperboy. This is a game I had beaten. You know, sometimes I'd beat it, sometimes I'd fail. All you have to do is get through 7 days without... You can crash up to 3 times. After 3, you're dead, but now at the end of each, like the 2 streets, there's an obstacle course. If you crash on the obstacle course, it does not count as one of your lives. So actually, one of my YouTube videos that I did of this game, I beat the game. Tetris is another game we had. Baseball. Yeah, this game was kind of primitive. You only had 6 teams. The teams didn't even have names, they had letters. There was A, C, D, P, R, and Y. And all the players were pretty much identical. There were no individual players, they all had the same abilities. There's no one player better than the other. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. This is a game my friend Faye had. He actually showed me how to beat it, but he used the password. So what he'd do is he'd start at the town of Jova, walk all the way to the left, squat down for the tornado, and go all the way to the right. So this game got a lot of criticism for being cryptic, but I never had any of those problems because Faye knew how to beat it, and I watched him play the first time. So when we got the game for Christmas one year, we played, doing the same thing. We used the password, and it'd take like 10 or 15 minutes to beat. I never did attempt to do a full playthrough of it back then. Another game we had, Back to the Future. See, I didn't realize as a kid which games were terrible and which ones weren't. I just always assumed, if they made it to the NES, they must have been good. I always assumed that maybe I'm just bad at the game. But, now I realize some of these games were really terrible, especially this one. I never did get far in this game. I got to Lou's Cafe, but I could never pass that part. Karate Kid. This is another game I had, and this is another one I couldn't beat as a kid, and this one is at least is better as far as, for games that were published by LJN, better than Back to the Future. But I could not beat this as a kid. I had finally beat it as an adult just earlier this year. So I uploaded that video onto YouTube of me beating it. It's a pretty exciting feeling when you're playing a game that you played your whole life, that you had ever since your childhood, and you finally beat it. Super Mario Brothers, I should add, is another one. I could not beat that one as a kid. I remember my sister beating it when we were kids, and I was watching, but I just never had the patience, and I'd always get frustrated, especially with the Hammer Brothers in World 8-3, and I could never pass World 8-3 as a kid. Over the years, I would play it every now and then, and I'd usually get to World 8 and die in 8-1 or 8-2, but the furthest I could get was 8-3. After dying a few times on the same level, I'd usually just give up. Teensy Surf Designs, another one. I liked the skateboarding part in this game, but then there's the surfing one that was way too hard. I couldn't figure that one out. Simpsons Bert vs. the Space Mutants. There's another side-scrolling platformer, but it's kind of interesting. You have to turn all the objects, all the purple objects, you have to spray paint, or just get rid of the color purple. So some things you can spray paint red. There's other things you can cover up with like a towel. There's windows you can shoot with bottle rockets. So it's kind of cool. There's all these different items, and you can use different things to get rid of the purple color. Never have beaten this game either. Here's a game we had, Gumshoe. My sister got this one time, and my dad took us to, I want to say it was Target, but I can't remember any. Let us each pick out a game. I can't remember what game I picked out that time, but my sister Jody picked out Gumshoe. And when we got home, it turned out we couldn't play it because you needed the NES Zapper, and we didn't have one. So for most of the time, this game just laid around not getting played. There was one time we borrowed somebody's Zapper. I can't remember if it was my friend Faye or not. So we did actually get to play it. And then I had another friend in school named Colin who decided to temporarily trade with me Gumshoe for Ghostbusters because he had a Zapper. So we had this game for quite a while before we traded back. And there's another one I couldn't get far as a kid. As an adult, I almost beat it. I got to the rooftop but I just could not beat it at the end. Tecmo Bowl. This is a game that my friend Faye, this is a game Faye had. I didn't have this game, and we played this at his house a lot. And I remember we were both getting into baseball, becoming big baseball fans, so he had his basement set up as a baseball card shop, and it was a really nice baseball card shop too. He had big display cases and had all these baseball cards in there, and you'd have kids from the neighborhood come down and look at them, and sometimes they'd buy them. He had like a cash register he bought, and I mean, that guy, he was really handy with that stuff. And anyway, down in the basement he also had a TV. He hired me to work there with them, but we were only open for business for maybe a few weeks before his parents shut it down. They were worried about lawsuits, kids getting hurt on the property, and end up suing. So I mean, I don't even know how much money he paid me. Maybe I probably made $5 or $10 the whole time I worked there. But it was fun sitting behind his display cases playing this game, Tecmo Bowl, all the time. I grew up as a Packer fan. They didn't have the Packers in this game, so I played as the Raiders, and becoming a Bo Jackson fan. My friend Faye was a Bears fan, so he always played as the Bears. I mean, the game was fun. It was the game that taught me how to play football, but it had a lot of flaws. Here's another game Faye had, Bases Loaded. Now this game actually has teams. They don't have team names, but they got team cities. I always pick Jersey, Faye always picked DC, so they're not professional teams. And in this game, the players are actual individuals. They have names, they have their own unique abilities. Some are home run hitters, some are fast runners. So this was a game I had a lot of memories playing too. Double Dribble, another game Faye had. Basketball games, had 4 teams. It had Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, and New York. I always picked Chicago. I think Faye picked Boston all the time. This is a game that's tough to play against the computer. You really have to focus on defense, whereas most basketball games I seem to focus more on offense. But yeah, I remember playing this game against the computer as an adult, and I got beat by like 40 or 50 points. And another time I played, I ended up barely winning. And I realized that you have to really try to steal the ball from them every opportunity. It seems like in this game, you only make like 1 out of every 10 shots, whereas the computer makes 9 out of every 10. I mean, it's one of those games that they cheat. I mean, because there's really nothing you could do. You press the button to shoot, hope it goes in. The computer always seems to go in, but yeah, this game was developed by Konami. Konami was a pretty popular third-party developer back in the day. Here's another game Faye had, WWF WrestleMania. And this only had 6 wrestlers in it. There was Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Andre the Giant, $1 Million Man. There was that one, I can't remember his name, the guy with the guitar. I think he was supposed to be like a parody of Elvis or something. But Honky Tonk Man, that's his name. And there's one other, oh, Bam Bam Bigelow was the other one. But I mean, this game really wasn't that good. Back at the time it was, because it was like all, you know, they had for options as far as wrestling games. Super Mario Brothers 2. This was released October 9th of 1988, and Faye was one of the lucky ones who got the game, because a lot of people had a hard time finding this game because there was a chip shortage, and there was also rumors that Nintendo was trying to hold out on releasing the game to increase the demand. I'm not sure if that was ever true or not, but Faye's mom happened to be one of the lucky ones who found it at a store for him, and I remember Faye spending the night at our house one time, and me and my sister Jody watched him play all the way through. Although he did use warp tunnels, and I played a few times too and used warp tunnels. And I don't think I could beat the game as a kid, but Faye could. Here's another game. Now this is the arcade game, Double Dragon. Me, my friend Faye, and my friend Corey would collect as much money from our parents as we can. We'd walk down to this bar called the Lucky Lady, and they had this arcade game. Now this is back in the 80s. Back then, grown-ups didn't have any problem with 3 kids walking into a bar to play arcade games. You know, it was completely, everything was different back in those days. I mean, nowadays, they probably don't legally let anyone under the age of 21 in a bar, but anyway, it was during the daytime. You know, there'd maybe be a couple people sitting in the bar, so nobody really had a problem with it. We'd go in there and just spend as much money. We'd cash in all our money for quarters and just spend our time playing. Now, it's only a 2-player game. There were 3 of us, so we'd have like 2 of us start out playing while one stood behind watching. Now, when one of us died, the person watching would take over. We'd just kind of rotate spots, and we kept rotating that way. So whoever's watching would take the place of the next person who dies, and we would play this game from start to finish. And I couldn't even imagine how many quarters we spent in this game, but I absolutely loved this arcade game. I would come across it again when I was 15 years old. My family and I took a vacation to Adventureland and stayed at the hotel there. The hotel's game room had this game, and I'm pretty sure it took me $10 worth of quarters to beat it, if I remember right. So yeah, I beat this game with a friend, and I also beat it by myself. And then we started going to a video game store called Family Videos. My parents would take us there every single Friday and Saturday night, because we also got a VCR, our first family VCR, that same year that we got our NES. So my dad would always rent a couple movies for himself, and my sister and I would rent 3 video games, because I had this deal: if you rent 2, you get a 3rd rental for free. And my mom was never really into movies or video games too much. So, I mean, she mostly liked the older movies, like the 50s and 60s, so she wasn't really interested in the movie or game rental, but she'd just go along because we went as a family. And a lot of times on Friday nights we went out to eat at restaurants as a family, and then we'd stop at Family Videos afterwards. So many times we went there. Here's some of my favorite rentals. There was Maniac Mansion. This is a game I could never beat as a kid. I got pretty far, but I couldn't quite beat it. Now as an adult, I watched a YouTube video and learned a couple different ways to beat it. So yeah, I've done YouTube videos, and pretty much most of the games we're going to be seeing in here, I've done YouTube videos on them. I mean, I know there's some Atari games that I showed but we didn't see because I don't have them, but I'll get more into that later on in the video. Here's another game I loved, Spy vs. Spy. This is a unique game. In this game you want to collect passports, money, papers, a key, and the bag. Now, for these other 4 items, that they don't have the key in this picture, but for these 4 items, you can only hold 1 at a time. But if you get the bag, you can hold all 4 of them, and the object is to collect all 4 of those items and then go to the door with the airplane on it. And meanwhile, you also set traps on each other, bombs, and other stuff inside these shelves when you're looking for these items. But yeah, I used to love running this game. Here's another one of my favorites, North and South. This is another really unique game. It starts out almost like a chess game or checkers game, where you're moving your kernels around the board. because I guess technically you'd be the general, and these guys would each be colonels who have their own like regiments. And when you put one colonel on top of the other one, you go to battle, and you can actually blow up the bridge. You can blow up this house. And blowing up the house really isn't going to affect your gameplay, but blowing up the bridge can prevent both sides from crossing right here, although you can still cross on these thin rocks. But my only complaint about this game is when playing one player against the computer, the player has to press the button to switch between whether you want to control the gunmen, the horses, or the cannon. Meanwhile, the computer player can simultaneously control all three of them, so I mean that's really not fair. Here's another battle scene. See, the terrain's different depending on where you are on the map. So, going back to this map, like let's say he moves his colonel up on my colonel, we'll go to battle right there, and based on what position you're standing in, that's where the terrain is different. Did a video on that game too, of course. Oh, and here's another terrain, kind of like a desert area. And then you can hijack the other player's train, because that's how you make money through the game. You got a train going by, and the train drops off money. When you get enough money, you can buy another colonel. Well, you can hijack their train and take their money. You can also take over the other player's forts. You see the boot and the clock down here. The boot represents your position from the start to the finish, while the clock, which is kind of hard to see behind the boot, represents the timer. So you have to get there before the timer does. And what's unique is you could play as either the North or the South. You could play two players. You could play one player versus the computer, or you could even do computer versus computer and just watch the gameplay itself. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, another game I used to run all the time. Now, there was a kid that lived a block away from me named Mike, who used to be able to, I can't remember if he was able to beat it or his brother. I think it was his brother was able to beat it. And I can't remember his brother's name offhand. But anyway, yeah, Mike Tyson was really hard. So when playing this game, first you play against Glass Joe, which is this guy here. Then you got Von Kaiser. Then you got Piston Honda. Then you go against Don Flamenco. Then you've got King Hippo, Great Tiger, and then I believe Bald Bolt after that. And I can never get past Soda Popinski, this guy right here. So I recently did a video on this game. I got as far as Soda Popinski just like usual, but this time I actually also used the password to get to Mike Tyson, and it didn't last long at all. Super Dodgeball, another game that I rented many times. This one I could actually beat. I played in easy mode though, I never played in hard mode. Lone Ranger, another game I used to run all the time. This is another Konami game. Konami games are always good, but they're really hard. Yeah, this game is just kind of, you're looking for pieces of some plate, but anyway, I can only get to a certain point and I give up. So this is one of those games where I'd run it, I'd have fun for maybe 20-30 minutes and then get bored with it, and I'd usually maybe next day start over at the beginning again. Motor City Patrol, this is another game I used to rent and play all the time. Playing this game as an adult is completely different. It's just not as fun as it was when I was a kid. It's weird when you come across games that are like that. You had so much fun playing them as a kid, and then Now, complete opposite. There's also games that I didn't like as a kid. The Legend of Zelda, for example. I remember running that and had no idea what I was doing. I was dying too easy. I was getting frustrated. And then as I got older, I saw a YouTube video on it, learned how to play it, and now I love it. I recently did a top favorite 50 video, and I ranked it number 3. It's my 3rd favorite game. Baseball Stars, another game I used to rent. Me and my friend Faye used to play this game. And we also had a friend Jeremy who had recently moved from Seattle, Washington, who he was really into baseball too, so the 3 of us would go outside and play baseball, and then we'd also like playing baseball on Nintendo. This was one game that all 3 of us enjoyed playing. This game you could create your own players, and you could play like a full season. You can even create your own team name, and when you play like a season, every time you win a game you get money, and you can use that money to build your players up. So it's kind of like an RPG of baseball. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was another game I used to like renting, but could never really get very far in it. Another LJN game. Another LJN game. Bill and Ted's Excellent Video Game Adventure. This game I used to rent quite a bit, and I could never get far in this one either, but it was just, the map was big enough where you could play for a long time before finally getting bored and giving up on it. So, I mean, it was good for a rental. You could spend a weekend playing, trying to figure things out. Same with Roger Rabbit. There was like a, he had like, it was a non-linear game where you could wander around and do stuff. A Boy and His Blob. This game was actually developed by David Crane of Activision, the same guy that developed Pitfall on the Atari 2600. And this is another one that was a fun rental, but never really got that far in it. I saw a YouTube video on a way you can kind of cheat to beat it, but I tried doing the same thing and I just, for some reason, kept screwing up. I should go back and do that again sometime, try to watch that video and try to beat it myself. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This is a Konami game. Now it says on the, it actually says Ultra on the game. That's because, see, Nintendo had a very strict rule with third-party developers that you could only develop 5 games a year. Well, Konami kind of found a way around it by creating a subdivision called Ultra Games. So that way they could release 5 games under the name Ultra and then 5 games under the name Konami. I don't think Nintendo really tried to stop them, most likely because Konami usually put out some pretty good games. So, I mean, that was the whole reason why Nintendo set a limit to games, because they didn't want to repeat the mistakes that happened, which caused the video game crash of 1983. Yeah, way too many video game companies out there, and just companies that weren't even video games were developing mass amounts of terrible games. There was like no control. It just, you know, Nintendo tried to keep a strict control over the video game market to prevent another crash. But Konami is one of those companies that always had good games. I mean, they're hard, but they were fun. And I mean, if you're patient with them, you could probably beat them. But me, I never had the patience. So this is another game I enjoyed playing, but could never get really far. Back to the Future Part 2 and 3. Another LJN game. Another one I used to run all the time. Didn't know what I was doing, but you know, you could wander around and just kind of do all kinds of stuff. Top Gun. This is a game I used to rent a lot, and this is a game I have beat as a kid, but I usually die. You only got 3 lives, and I mean, it's pretty boring because, I mean, the only way to survive is to keep your nose pointed at the sky. Otherwise, if you're facing down, you're going to have all these missiles shooting up at you. And then there's the landing sequence, which I was pretty good at that. And there's 4 levels in the game. This is another Konami game, so it was kind of hard, but I was able to beat it. And I can't remember if I beat it in any of my YouTube videos. If not, I might have to go back and play this game until I beat it and upload it. Got the Punisher. There's another game that I used to rent. Pretty fun. You're just sitting there shooting at all these bad guys. One thing I really like about this game is you can choose your level. There's 3 different levels to choose. You get to choose which one. Chess Master. And I took chess club back in junior high school, learned how to play chess, and I loved the game. Unfortunately, growing up, I never really ran into other people that knew how to play, so I rent the game on NES and play against the computer. Now, back in 2010, when I got my very first laptop, it had a game, Chess Titans, on it. I used to love playing that. I play almost every day. But then my computer broke down, and all the laptops I got after that never had any chess games on them. So, it was another one fun to play. I actually also play chess on my phone with my friend Coco. Me and her are always playing games on Game Pigeon. One of the games we play is chess. She doesn't quite know how to play chess yet, but she's a really fast learner, so I think eventually we play enough games, she'll get good at it, and we'll have a lot more fun. Here's the Three Stooges. I used to rent this game quite a bit, and I have beat this game. It's kind of hard to do, though. You're supposed to raise money to save an orphanage, and you've got 30 days. It's got all these mini games you play, but it kind of gets repetitive playing the same mini games over and over. The Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle. This is kind of a fun game that would be good on, it's kind of like an arcade style, like a clear stage. And I've never beaten this game because it's one of those games, it's just kind of gets monotonous. It's like you're doing the same thing. I mean, sure, the levels change, but it's like at some point you just kind of get tired of it and like, yeah, I'm gonna do something different. So yeah, another good rental. California Games. This had a bunch of mini games, like there's roller skating, like some hacky sack, frisbee toss, I think. There's like a skateboarding game, a bike game, like BMX, so all these mini games. Vegas Dreams is another one that was fun to rent. Basically playing casino games. And you might have random people come up to you asking you like, hey, can you hold my wallet or something like that? And you can choose yes or no. Well, then after that they show a news report where sometimes the wallet might be stolen, so you got arrested and you got fined, they take money from you. Or maybe they come back and pay you, you know, a reward for holding their wallet for them, where you get money. So it's kind of like an extra gamble in there. Here's another game that I enjoyed playing as a kid, but I just get bored with now if I play it. Wall Street Kid. You're pretty much sitting at a desk all day making decisions. You can buy stocks, sell stocks. You can call your wife and take her on dates. You can go to the gym, go hiking, and I mean, you're just trying to get up to a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time. Here's a game I used to really have fun playing, Deja Vu. You start out, it's a point and click game where you start out not knowing who you are or anything. You're wandering around trying to figure stuff out. But I mean, it's really hard. It's one of those games where you have to make all these decisions, and it seems like I always get to a point where you got like 5 different choices. If you make the right one, you get to proceed. If you make the wrong choice, game over, and I always seem to make that wrong choice. Here's another game I used to run all the time, Blades of Steel. I was just kind of starting to get into hockey a little bit. Had a slight interest. This is another Konami game, another good one they made. Okay, so I was at Family Videos one time and I saw Double Dragon on the NES. I was so excited because I loved the arcade game. So I went and rented it. I got home and I was extremely disappointed. It just seemed like such a watered down version of the game I loved. The sound effects weren't nearly as good. The visual effects weren't as good. The music wasn't as good. And the thing I hate the most is you play to a certain point, and once you lose all your lives, game over. Whereas the arcade game, you could just keep plugging in quarters and playing. So I wish they would have done something like that with the NES version, where you can just keep on playing all the way to the end. But yeah, I rented this game. I was very disappointed in it. I still bought the game. I still own it. Actually, I'm not sure if I own the physical cartridge, but I do have it down. I did download it on the Wii, just because, I mean, I couldn't download the arcade version, but I still had fun playing a little bit. I was just disappointed that it wasn't as good, and now I kind of understand why Pac-Man on the Atari 2600, I kind of understand how people felt about that, why they hated it, because it was nowhere near the arcade quality. Tecmo Super Bowl, I was just amazed. The first time my friend Corey invited me over to his house and we played Tecmo Super Bowl, and it was just so amazing because they had all 28 teams in the game, you know, all 28 NFL teams. And not only that, but they had the team colors in that, because the original Tecmo Bowl, they had the players in it, but they didn't have the team names. They just had the cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, Denver. This game actually had the full team, like Green Bay Packers, and they had the players. Also, this game was much different because the first game, like if you're playing against the computer, full season, you start out week 1, let's say you're playing against Chicago. Well, let's say you get beat. Well, when you play week 2, or actually you don't even get to go to week 2, you have to play week 1 again until you have to beat that team until you can advance to the next week, which I don't like. So if you're playing a really hard team, you have to keep playing that team over and over again just to advance to week 2 or to week 3 and so on. So the Tecmo Super Bowl, the sequel, was much more like real football, where, and if you lose week 1, you still go on to week 2, and it actually keeps track of your record. So I mean, Tecmo Bowl, the only way to win in Tecmo Bowl, you have to go undefeated all the way. That's the only way you can do it. But Tecmo Super Bowl is like real football. You can have like a, you know, like a 10-6 record and you still go to the playoffs. And they have like the playoff brackets up there. So yeah, I used to love this game. I ended up running it quite a few times after playing it that one time. And I even remember getting it for Christmas, but it was very late in my NES life because it was probably like the last year that I had the NES. And I remember Super Mario Brothers 3 coming out. I remember me and Faye were talking about, or Faye and I guess I should say, I remember talking about this game. I heard there was going to be a Super Mario Brothers 3, and I remember telling Faye about it, and he told me, no, that's just a rumor. There's not going to really have a Super Mario Brothers 3. And then suddenly there it was. It came out, and I remember going to Family Videos, and Family Videos had like 20 copies of the game, but they were all rented out. It was crazy because most of the games down there, they only own like 2 or 3 copies of them, but this game, they knew it was going to be huge. There was like 20 copies, all rented out. So finally one day I went in there and they had a copy. I rented it, and I had it for 3 days. Rented it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I remember taking it to Faye's house one night, and we were playing upstairs. I don't know where the rest of his family was. They weren't home. So we were playing this game, and we decided to make a cookie, or we were going to make chocolate chip cookies. And instead of making small cookies, we decided to make it into one huge cookie, and we shaped it like a mushroom, like Super Mario Brothers. And we cooked it while we were playing. We ended up leaving it in too long. It got burnt, so we had to throw some of it away, but there were some of it salvageable. And I remember eating pieces of the cookie while playing this game, and we got to World 8, but we could not beat it. I mean, now I could beat the game no problem. I beat it all the time. When I play this game now, I don't like to take any warps. I'll collect all 3 warp whistles, but I won't use them. I like to play every level. I like to play every Toad house. Everything in the game I like to do. I don't like skipping stuff. And usually by the time I beat the game, I have 99 lives. That's the most you can hold. Okay, one Christmas, I think this might have been Christmas of 1990 or 89. Yes, I know I'm kind of jumping around here because I'm showing the NES. Like Super Mario Brothers 3 was released February 9th of 1990. Well, now we're going back to Christmas of 1989. Jody and I each got our own Game Boy. And the game I had was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan. I was able to beat this game. Surprising for a Konami game, but I guess Game Boy is a little bit easier. Of course, then again, this is the only Konami game the only Konami games I owned as a kid that I could think of offhand is this one and Simon's Quest. And that might be why I could beat the 2, because I had more time to play them. Whereas the rentals, I only had a weekend, and I'd stop playing. Oh, Top Gun was another one that I was able to beat. Another game we had, Home Alone on the Game Boy. This was Jody's game, but we played each other's games every now and then. I really like this game. I like the idea of it, the style, but I can never beat, I think it's level 3, where you got the ghost floating around at the very end of the level. I can never beat that end boss. Tetris. Now, anyone who bought a brand new Game Boy back at the time got the game Tetris for free with it. So this is a game we played. We had a link cable too, where we could play against each other. We could connect our Game Boys. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't imagine the link cable probably came with the Game Boy. I mean, there's probably some people that just bought one Game Boy, not 2 of them. So yeah, I imagine the linkage is probably sold separately. Okay, arcades. Now getting into my teenage years. When I was 16 years old, I used to hang out at this bowling alley, and this is one of the games I played there. Street Fighter 2. Another game I really loved, which is not really video games, is Addams Family Pinball. I used to play that all the time in the summer of '93. But this is more fall of '93. I was playing Street Fighter 2 Arcade. Another one, Super High Impact Arcade. So I love those 2 games. And finally, during that fall, I remember one night, me and my family were out eating dinner, and it was just a regular Friday night. Had our normal plans to go to Family Videos afterwards. I asked my dad if I could rent a Super Nintendo game, or a Super Nintendo console, and some Super Nintendo games, because By this time our NES was just having so many problems. Anyone who's owned the NES knows about blowing in their cartridges and trying them again. But mine was getting to the point where I was blowing in every game like 10 times, and I was constantly cleaning the console and the games, and it just seemed like it was taking forever for the game to work. So I thought maybe it was about time to try something different, so I asked my dad if we could run a Super Nintendo and some games, and he said sure, so I rented Street Fighter 2 and Super High Impact on the Super Nintendo, and they were very close to the arcade version. So that Christmas, this was probably in November of '93 when I started running them. In early December I ended up getting my first job flipping burgers at a burger joint. And I remember, now that I was getting paychecks, I was only working like maybe 2 or 3 days a week, because I was 16 years old, it was part-time, and paychecks were probably more like $100. But I mean, at 16 years old, it seemed like a lot of money back then. And I remember I started running my own Super Nintendo and games, because I mean, it gets pretty pricey running both the console and the games. My dad didn't want to run it every week for me, so I get off work. I usually worked on Friday nights. I get off work, and I ended up getting a car too. My dad bought a car for me to use. Now, it wasn't officially my car. I still had to ask permission to use it unless I was driving it to school or to work. But now, on times when my dad wasn't home, I'd go out and use it. And like if it was just my mom, my mom would. She was the type that she was a pushover. She could never boss us around. If I wanted to use the car, she wouldn't tell me no. She also, because she was nice. My dad was a little more strict. But anyway, so I ended up getting the Super Nintendo for Christmas that year, and so there's the Super Nintendo. Super Mario World came with it, and I remember playing this game. By this time I was hanging around with a friend Bobby. Yeah, I kind of lost touch with my old friends. Rhonda, her grandma moved out, so I really didn't hang around with her. That was back when I was in junior high school. And then when I got to high school, like probably my freshman year in high school, me, Faye, Corey, and Jeremy just all kind of drifted. We all kind of went our own ways. So now I started hanging around with my sister Jody, and there was the new neighbor girl Danielle, and there was Danielle's cousin Shayna, and both of their cousin Bobby. So I remember hanging out with Bobby one time at his house and playing this game. I took my Super Nintendo up there. This was shortly after getting my Super Nintendo, probably like the last week. We're still on Christmas vacation, so I got the Super Nintendo for Christmas, and I remember taking it up to his house with Super Mario World, and I could not get past Castle 3, which is inside the Vanilla Dome here. There's that one Magic Koopa that shoots those things at you, those triangle things. I could not get past that guy. I mean, now I could beat the game no problem. But there are certain areas in this game I did not know about when I was younger. I didn't find out about them until much later in my life. Here's one of the games I got for Christmas, Street Fighter 2. There were so many different versions. There was Street Fighter 2, there was Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers. And then also on multiple consoles. You had like on Super Nintendo, you had on Genesis, TurboGrafx 16, and probably the Neo Geo AES. Now when I was growing up, it was all about Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis back at this time. I never heard about the TurboGrafx 16, so I didn't even know about it at the time. I do remember hearing about the Atari Jaguar. It was supposed to be more advanced than the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, but I only heard about it, and then it just kind of disappeared. Nobody talked about it anymore. I didn't know anybody that had one. So it's kind of like this mystery. Another console that was released around this time was the Panasonic 3DO. That's another console I do not remember. Super High Impact is the other game I got for Christmas. And here's some of the other games we ended up getting over the years. We got Jody and I took all our old NES games and went to a local video game store and traded them in for credit, and we ended up buying this game, Tom and Jerry. You know, this is a game I can't really get that far in. Super Mario All-Stars. I remember my mom and my sister sent in something to Nintendo of America where they got like a discount on this game. So they bought this for me because they knew I'd love it. It's a compilation of old Mario games. There's Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers The Lost Levels, Super Mario Brothers 2, and Super Mario Brothers 3. All of these games were 16-bit versions of the originals. Now, I did not realize at the time that Super Mario Brothers The Lost Levels was actually the Japanese version of Super Mario Brothers 2. It wouldn't be until YouTube came out when I learned about that story. If you want to see a good story on that, I'd suggest watching the Gaming Historians documentary on it. A really good one. And then Nintendo of America sent me a VHS tape in '94 sometime. It was like a 20-minute demo and behind the scenes of Donkey Kong Country, which was going to be released November of 1994. And I mean, watching this VHS tape was enough to convince me to get the game, so I ended up getting it that Christmas. Love the game. It's very similar to Super Mario World in the style of playing. You got like the overworld map, you've got, you know, it's a side-scrolling platformer game. In this game you collect bananas the way Mario collects coins. You can ride on different animals the way Mario rides on Yoshi. But the graphics in this game were just mind-blowing at the time. I mean, even now, the graphics still look amazing in this game. I mean, they're not as realistic as some of today's games, but still they're fun to look at. This is another game I could not beat. I got as far as the Ice World, World 4, 4-2, that's snow, where it's... No, I can pass the snowy one, I think that's 4-1. 4-2 is like where it's all icy inside. I've never passed that level. MLBPA. Yeah, being a big baseball fan, I had to get a baseball game. And this was developed by EA Sports. They had all the players, and kind of like Tecmo Bowl, they had the teams, cities, but they didn't have rights to use the team names. They had rights to use the players' names. So I always played, you know, I grew up as a White Sox fan. I grew up liking the Chicago White Sox and the Green Bay Packers. That's who my dad liked, so same teams I liked. And I actually been to 9 White Sox games in my life, 5 in the old Comiskey Park and 4 in the new one. I went to those games between 1988 and 1993. I've also been to 2 Packer Bear games, both in Soldier Field. I was a Packer fan. My friend Shana was a Bear fan. Her and I went to a couple games, 99 and 2000. Anyway, back to MLBPA. Now, I don't think I've ever played a full 164 game or 162 game season. I think I auto skipped most of the time, but I have won the World Series in this game. I even did a full season on my YouTube channel, but it's not like we actually saw 162 games of any team. I auto skipped, but you know, I played as the White Sox. Every time we seen another team, the computer controlled all the other ones. I also did that same thing with the Tecmo football games, full seasons where I played as the Packers, and the other teams played by the computer. Okay, Tecmo Super Bowl on the Super NES. This is a game I ended up buying. Well, not buying, but got for Christmas. My parents bought it for me one year. And this is probably my favorite of all the Tecmo football games, just because I like all the cutscenes that come with it. It's fun. yeah, I don't know, it's just all around good game. And there's NHL 95. This is a game that, now, my friend Bobby had a friend named Floyd. Floyd had a friend who had NHL 95. Now, I was just starting to get into hockey at the time, and I picked the Chicago Blackhawks as my team. And, you know, I was really starting to follow hockey. This is like 94. And I had Tecmo Super Bowl. Floyd's friend wanted to temporarily trade me NHL 95 for Tecmo Super Bowl. And I agreed. Because I had rented NHL 94 before and played it, but I really didn't like it because I wasn't any good at it. So a lot of times I'd have computer versus computer just so I could watch instead of play. And I do remember one time I played, and I was so excited because I finished in a 1-1 tie. But NHL 95, I traded, and this game was a complete, like, huge evolution over NHL 94. There was like, they had a practice mode where you could play 5-on-3 players. So I ended up writing my own season. Like, I just kind of like drew names out of a hat who I'd play against, and I'd give myself 5 players and give the computer 2 players. And I did that, and then when I got good at that, I decided to give the computer 3 players, and I got good at that, and then I was able to play 5-on-5. I could do full seasons, so that's where I really learned where I really got good at playing the game, and I'm doing full seasons. And I mean, I'm not saying this is the best NHL game, but it's probably the most memorable one for me. You could also trade players, which you couldn't do in the previous one. You can create players, drop players to free agency. See, the old NHL 94, you had to use a password every time to advance. This one you didn't have to use a password, it automatically saved. And I forget what I was going to say. Oh, it also kept track of statistics too, like players, like shots, goals, assists, which I'm pretty sure the first game didn't, or not the first game, but the previous game. Okay, next we got Tecmo Super Bowl 3 Final Edition. Oh, by the way, going back, so I talked to Floyd. I never did meet Floyd's friend who traded with me, but I asked him if he wanted to permanently trade because I love this game so much, and he agreed. So I ended up having NHL 95, and then I'd end up getting this one for Christmas, NHL or Tecmo Super Bowl 3 Final Edition. And this is probably the football game I played the most because I've had it for so long. I had this game for like ever since probably 95. But yeah, I've done full seasons of this game many times. I've won the Super Bowl in this game. Now, the first Tecmo Super Bowl game on the Super NES, I don't think I've won the Super Bowl in that game, but I can't remember. I usually end up getting beat in the playoffs. Here's another game that I owned, SimCity. Now, I think I got this a little bit later in my life. I think I might have been in my early 20s when I got this game, because I was 17 when we got the Super Nintendo. I was actually, because we opened presents on Christmas Eve, so it was actually my 17th birthday when I got the Super Nintendo. So I was 17 when I got most of these games, but I think I was maybe 19 or 20 when I got this one. Star Fox is another game. I've rented it when I was younger, and then I ended up getting it at some point in my life when I was probably around 19 or 20. Jeopardy Sports Edition. Played that many times. Family Feud's another one. Played quite a bit. I owned for many years. I actually bought this game at a pawn shop because it's got the name Joey D written on it in permanent marker. I never did try to erase that. I probably should, just so it looks more professional. NHL 96 ended up coming out. I got that one for Christmas. I think it is better than NHL 95. More fun to play. It's just NHL 95's got more memories. Okay, so anyways, that was all the games I own. Now let's go to all the games I used to rent. Super Caesar's Palace. I actually rented this before owning the Super Nintendo, back when I used to rent the Super Nintendo every week. So I remember during Christmas break I had this game, and I remember that because my friend Bobby came up December 23rd. It was the first day of Christmas break. He brought his camcorder up, and we spent all day recording like little segments of like wrestling and doing all kinds of different stuff, and somewhere towards the end of this video we decided to play this game. Got to see like maybe a minute worth of video game play footage recorded off the camcorder. But pretty much a gambling game. In this one you can kind of wander around, play different things. The best way, if you want to get really good at this game, the best thing to do is, okay, you start out with $2,000. Go to a roulette table and bet like the full $2,000 on like even or odd or black or red. Well, if you lose, you just start over. If you win, you doubled your money. Go to the ATM, get your password, go back and do it again. If you win, you got $8,000. If you lose, well, then you just go back to the ATM and use that same password again, so you can just kind of keep continuing from where you left off. I mean, it'd be kind of a long process. It's also a long password that they give you, because it depends on how much you want to be a high roller in the game. Sim Ant was another game I used to rent all the time. Now, I don't think this might be a PC version because I don't remember this little flower. The graphics look slightly different, but anyway, pretty much the same. But yeah, you play as an ant in this game. You're the black ant colony, and you got the red ant colony. You gotta try building your colony up. Pretty fun game. Micro Machines, another game I used to rent all the time. It's pretty fun. You're racing like on a, you got like a kitchen table here. You got these Cheerios that kind of represent your racetrack. You got like milk spilled on the table, which if you drive through it, you slide. There's like a workbench racetrack where there's like glue, super glue spilled on the table. If you go through it, it kind of slows you down. So, pretty fun game. American Gladiators. Now, back in the summer of '93, probably the most memorable summer of my year, or of my life. Not sure why. It was just had a lot of fun. That's when I was hanging around with Bobby, Shayna, Jody, Danielle quite a bit, and I was really getting into the American Gladiator show. I used to record it every day, and I rented the Super Nintendo game. So it was real fun. Now I rented the NES game too, but the NES game is like not really that good. The Super NES game is far better. This one actually has the eliminators with it. My only problem with it is every time I play against the computer, I'm playing against someone named Sean. Why not randomize the character, have someone different? And this is also a game that'd be more fun to play 2 players. Another game I used to rent, Baseball 2000. Kind of a fun game. Michael Jordan's Cast in the Windy City. Rented this game many times. I never have beat this game. You know, I really haven't beaten many games on the Super Nintendo. When I get to the end of the video, I'll talk more about games I can beat and haven't beat and stuff. Mortal Kombat. Now, I have beaten this game on Super Nintendo, but it was in the very easy mode. So, I mean, I currently have the Super Nintendo version and the Sega Genesis version of both Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. The Super Nintendo version is far superior. When I get Mortal Kombat 3 on both consoles, I'm going to do a comparison video on all 3 Mortal Kombats. WWF Royal Rumble. This was a very fun game by LJN. I forgot to mention the Punisher which was on the NES, was also published by LJN and developed by Beam Software, which was the same two companies. Beam Software also developed Back to the Future, and it was published by LJN. So I mean, Back to the Future, a very terrible game. Punisher, a very fun game. So kind of interesting there. But this game is another one that was published by LJN, but was very fun. I think LJN's games seem to get a little bit better on the Super Nintendo. I mean, I haven't heard quite as many complaints about them when it comes to Super Nintendo games. But Royal Rumble, very fun game. Yeah, I think there's 12 wrestlers to choose from. I usually pick The Undertaker. And you can play like one-on-one. You can play one player or two players. You can play tag team match. If you're playing, you can play tag team match 2 players where each player plays co-op against the computer, or you can play against each other. And then there's Royal Rumble where you got 6 wrestlers in the ring at one time and you're trying to eliminate everyone. So yeah, most of these games I've done videos on, and I can beat this game too. Super Mario Kart, I remember when this game came out. I was in a bowling league at the time with my friends Bobby and Shayna, and we went over to my house Saturday morning, because bowling league was Saturday mornings, and afterwards we went to my house, played the games that I rented the night before, and this is the only game that I remember Shayna really liking, because Shayna was never really into video games, but she really liked this one. And I mostly like battle mode. I don't care quite as much for racing mode. Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, around this time I was also becoming a big fan of the show Star Trek The Next Generation. I never previously watched any previous Star Trek before this, so this was Star Trek The Next Generation was my first Star Trek experience, and I was really got into the show. So I ended up running the game, and the game is really hard to figure out at first. I mean, you gotta really kind of figure it out. I remember the first time running it, I was like, I had no idea what I was doing, and eventually I figured it out. MTV's Beavis and Butthead is another game I used to run quite a bit. It's a fun platformer game. It's really hard though. One thing that makes this game really good is it's another one of those games where you get to pick like what level you want to start out with. There's 4 levels. But actually, well, first there's 4 levels that you had to beat all 4 of them, and then you go to the 5th level. And there was one time I got to that 5th level. I think I was pretty close to beating the game, and I just didn't do it. But yeah, fun game, really hard, but it's got replay value because it's like you're not always playing the same level over and over. You get to pick. Mortal Kombat 2. I remember renting this one when it first came out. And my friend Bobby ended up getting the fatalities from his friend Floyd. The internet came out sometime back in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, and it was still kind of rare though. Not everyone had the internet, not many people had computers yet. So my friend, or Bobby's friend Floyd, had the internet, and he was able to print us off the fatality moves. Mortal Kombat 2, so Bobby and I just spent hours playing this game, trying fatalities, and it was pretty fun. Okay, then when I was 20 years old or 21 years old, let's see, I think it was in 97. Yeah, I turned 21 in 97, and yeah, by this time I was working a 3rd shift for a cleaning company. So I only worked Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And You know, so I was getting probably like $200 to $300 paycheck, so I ended up buying a Nintendo 64 because my friend Bobby invited me over to his house one time and told me, you know, he called me up and said, hey, there's something I want to show you, come over. So I went up to his house and he showed me Mario Kart 64 on the Nintendo 64, and my mind was just blown because he knew I loved Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. It was one of my favorite games, and now I finally get to play Mario Kart 64 for the first time. And suddenly, after playing this game, I really didn't care much for the Super Mario Kart anymore. You know, like, the games seemed kind of primitive. So I ended up buying a Nintendo 64. I ended up getting Mario Kart 64. So I played this many times. I got really good at it. And you know, it's funny because I had a friend at work recently, you know, just a few years ago. We're debating over who would be better at this game between me or him. He told me, he kept saying, well, this was my game back in the day. And I kept telling him, well, this is my game still today. I mean, I have my Nintendo 64 and my copy of Mario Kart 64 for over 20 years. So I've got like 20 years experience playing them. Whereas he used to just play back then, so I think I would probably win at this game. Then again, you see in like these Facebook rooms, and everyone thinks they're the best at these Super Mario Kart games. When the fact is, there's probably hundreds of people out there better. So I'm not saying I'm the best at this game, but I'm pretty confident I would beat my friend Jake if him and I played. Simply for the fact that I still play this game, and he hasn't played in like 20 years. Next game, Super Mario 64. I remember buying this out at Walmart, and our Walmart was fairly new back then, so it might have been one of my first times being there. And I remember playing this game for the first time, and I really didn't like it. I was so used to Mario games being side-scrolling platformers, so it was kind of hard to get used to the idea of a 3D game, but eventually I got into it. It would take me 9 years, but I'd finally beat this game. GoldenEye, I remember renting this game one night. Yeah, by this time my parents really weren't taking us to the video game store. I was in my 20s, and I was like 21. Jody would have been 20. Jody was actually living with her boyfriend at this time. So anyway, I rented this game on my own. One time I told Bobby, hey, I rented GoldenEye. He told me you should have just bought it. Well, it wasn't very long after that I did buy it. And played it many times. Now throughout 1998, I was hanging around with my friend Bobby quite a bit, and his girlfriend Jenny, and there was his friends Ryan, Tyler, Jared. They were all underage, and I was 21, so a lot of times we'd hang out and I'd get them booze, they'd give me the money and I'd go buy it for them. And we spent a lot of time playing games at sometimes Bobby's house, or sometimes Tyler's house, playing 4-player, multiplayer mode, and Tyler was always really good at it. It was weird, Bobby seemed to be pretty good at 4-player mode. Whenever him and I played 2-player, I always seemed to beat him. And there's a look at the 4-player mode. Then I went and got the Sony PlayStation also. I probably bought this in 98 because I wanted NHL 99. Because see, I had, on the Super Nintendo, I had NHL 96, I had 97, I had 98. And they stopped making NHL games on the Super Nintendo, so I got NHL 99 on the PlayStation. And played this game many times. And then Driver is another game I had on PlayStation. This is actually Jody's game, but she loaned it to me because she also had a PlayStation at her house. So for many years, I had the Super Nintendo, the Sony PlayStation, and Nintendo 64 all hooked up to TV. and I'd kind of rotate between games. I still had the same games I owned on the Super Nintendo that I showed. I had the 3 games I owned on the Nintendo 64, and I only had, I think NHL 99 was the only one I owned on PlayStation, but Jody loaned me Driver, so I had that for a little while. And then, so I had those games from 1999, or those consoles, from 1999 to 2006. I just had the same consoles and games. I ended up getting NHL 2000 on the PlayStation, but I got mad and broke it. So I went back to playing 99. So over the next 7 years, there were no more new NHL games coming out for the PlayStation because the PS2 was out. And I was getting sick of buying consoles. I mean, I bought the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, and I only had very few games for them, so I wasn't about to keep buying newer consoles if I'm only going to have a handful of games. So I just stuck with those 3 from 1999 to 2006. And I went through a lot through those years. 1999, I ended up quitting my job with my cleaning company, Santa Pro. They went out of business shortly after I quit. And I worked for a temp agency at a factory. I did that for 7 months till it got slow and we got laid off. And then in 2000, I ended up working for another cleaning company, FBG Services, which I loved working for them. And once again, I went back to cleaning floors, third shift in grocery stores. And in 2001, I ended up getting promoted as supervisor in 2001. And I ended up buying my first computer that year. I ended up getting into the AOL chat rooms, and I ended up getting my first girlfriend. I was 24 years old when I got my first girlfriend. And she lived an hour away, so we started dating. We dated for like 5 months, broke up. And then in 2002, I started dating another girl I met in another AOL chat room. She lived 3 hours away. We had a little bit more consistent relationship. I was driving down to visit her every weekend. And then 4 months into the relationship, she was pregnant. So right before the baby was born, I ended up moving down there, moved in with her, took all my video game consoles, and we had a son together. But it was me, her, and our son, and her twin sister living together, and that didn't work out. Everyone told me that things weren't going to work out if her sister lived with us, and sure enough, it wasn't working out. We didn't all enjoy playing Mario Kart 64 though, but I only lived there for 3 months. We broke up, so I came back home. It was finally in 2006. I was still working for FBG, and well, so I worked for FBG for 3 years. I quit when I moved in with my son's mom. While I was living there, her dad was manager of a porn shop, so I worked there for the 3 months I lived there. But then when I came back home, I ended up getting my job back with FBG Services, so I worked another 3 years. So anyways, 2006, I was talking to my friend James, who we worked together at a grocery store, and he ended up loaning me Grand Theft Auto 2 because he had a PS2. I still had the original PlayStation, so he started loaning me some of his games that he had for the PS1, like Grand Theft Auto 2, Medal of Honor. I ended up liking those games, so I bought them. I would later come to find out that this game was created by Steven Spielberg, and the idea was conceived off of GoldenEye. Finally, my friend James convinced me to get the PS2. I was over at his house one time playing it, and it was enough to convince me to get my own. I bought one at a pawn shop for $60. And I ended up quitting my job with FBG. Although I liked the company, I got a new boss who was on a power trip. Plus there was another cleaning company that was offering me more money, so I went to them. And I don't want to mention their name because probably the worst company I've ever worked for. We worked We didn't get any paid vacation. We didn't get any paid holidays. We had to work on most holidays like Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Eve. We didn't get holiday pay for it. And yeah, it was just a terrible company to work for. We had terrible equipment, the scrub machines, the propane burnishers looked like something they bought out from a garage sale. And they looked like antiques. They're always breaking down. We had one burnishing machine. We had to actually take it outside of the grocery store and start it up because it used to blow out smoke for like 5 minutes after it started. We'd have to wait for it to heat, like warm up for 5 minutes before we could take it back into the store. I mean, yeah, this company was just a joke. I worked for that company from 2006 to 2010. Same pay rate, $9.50 an hour. Never got a raise. I was pretty much working with the same three guys. One of them was my best friend, Fred, him and I became friends in 2003. Shortly after I moved back home, I got my job back with the FPG. Him and I became friends. He actually kind of talked me into going to PBS. Whoops, I wasn't going to mention their name, but yeah, terrible company to work for. At least back then it was. I can't say they're still a bad company. But anyway, I ended up getting Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories. And I ended up buying Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Another thing that was really terrible about that time, when I started working out, when I started with PBS, I was promised 40 hours a week, $10 an hour. Well, they started me at $9.50. I never did get that raise. Not only that, but my child support went up. I was paying child support, and it went up from $216 a month to $340 a month. Well, then over the next couple of years, my hours got cut down to 30 hours a week. So I mean, it's like my paychecks were like between $300 to $350 every 2 weeks. I really wasn't making much money. So anyway, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. So I really like both these games, Liberty City Stories and San Andreas. I think I like Liberty City Stories a little bit more though, because I can get further in it. San Andreas you could do a lot more stuff in, which is what makes it so fun, but I think it's harder. Finally got a new hockey game, NHL 07. And I got The Sims. Got The Sims 2. This game's really not that fun, The Sims 2. I really like the first Sims game. This game I really don't care quite that much for. Sims 2 Castaway, really fun game. I love that one. I feel like the PlayStation version is broken though. The PS2 version, it glitches, it freezes up. I don't know if they rushed to get the game put out or what, but I mean, it's developed by EA Sports, Electronic Arts, which is a very popular and good company. I don't know why this game just had so many problems. Now, I do believe the game existed on GameCube as well, so I eventually want to get that game and see if it runs any better. But this is a game that you want to save often because sometimes it freezes up and you don't know if it's going to continue playing or if it's going to remain freezing. So I usually save my game like every 20 to 30 minutes when playing. I ended up getting Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Monopoly is another PS2 game I love playing. Now, unlike the other consoles, like, okay, the Atari 2600, the NES, the Super NES, the N64, and the PlayStation, I showed pretty much every game I owned. Now, there are more PS2 games I own that I didn't show because I just felt they weren't worth it. So, anyway, in 2010, I got laid off from my job cleaning floors because the grocery store I was cleaning ended up hiring illegal immigrants. So, my company got laid off. The PBS I was working for got laid off. But, I mean, it was the happiest day of my life because I wanted to get away from third shift anyway. I'd been working third shift for 12 years. It was getting old. I wanted to do something new, so I ended up going back to school, community college, take auto mechanics, and I was collecting $70 a week unemployment after child support was taken out. Wasn't much. I did have student loans though, so in 2011 while I was going to school, I bought the Nintendo Wii. And the only reason I wanted to play this is because, or that I bought this, is so I could download old NES games. I really, because when I was going to school, I also started watching YouTube. That was the first time I really got into YouTube, and I started thinking about the old video games I used to play. So I started watching videos like people playing these games, and hearing the sounds, the musics, seeing the graphics brought back so many memories. I wanted to play the games again, so I ended up going to a pawn shop. Was it a pawn shop or was it a video game store? Anyways, I talked to them about buying the NES, and they said, oh, I got something better, the Wii. They said you can download NES games, so I ended up buying it. Unfortunately, there were a lot of good games that I couldn't download, like Maniac Mansion, Spy vs. Spy. They weren't available. So I did download the games I could play, like Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. And this is the first time I did a full playthrough Simon's Quest. I watched a YouTube video on it first. I was able to beat it, so that definitely became one of my top 10 favorite games. Legend of Zelda, I downloaded, and then I went and bought an old NES from a pawn shop because I wanted to play some original NES games, so I ended up ordering the games on eBay. And that's pretty much where my video game collecting kind of started. I mean, kinda. I mean, I still had my PS2 games and my Super Nintendo games, my N64 games, my PS1 games. But then I started buying NES games. Then I got the Wii U in 2015, December of 2015. The only reason I got this console was to play Super Mario Maker. By this point I was working, so I went to school until 2011. In the end of 2011 I ended up, finding an auto mechanic job wasn't easy. I put out resumes, didn't hear back, so I started working for a temp agency at a factory called Nordstrom. It's a distribution center, and I worked there for a year. So then in 2012 I got hired full-time, making the most money I had ever made. And that December that's when I started my YouTube channel, and by that time I had quite a collection of video games. So anyway, fast forward now to 2015, December, I got Super Mario Maker for the Wii. And then I went and bought the GameCube, because by this time I thought the GameCube is the only Nintendo console that was released in North America that I don't have yet, so I went and bought a GameCube, a few games for it. 2017 I bought the Nintendo Switch. I got that on launch day. That was the first video game console I had ever pre-ordered and got on launch day. I got the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 weeks after that. This is my all-time favorite video game. And then just this year, 2022, February 2022, I found a Sega Genesis at my local video game store, video games, etc. So I ended up buying it. I also bought some Genesis games. Now I already had some Genesis games before owning the Genesis, because I had the Sonic the Hedgehog games downloaded on the Wii. And then I also had, I didn't show pictures of, but I had retro consoles like the Retron 3, and the Retron 5, which I played Genesis games. So I was still buying Genesis games since I could still play them, but this is the first time I had the Genesis console. And I don't think I ever did hook the console up. That's because I have the Retron 5. Oh, I forgot to put it in my gallery here, that at one point back when I owned the Super Nintendo, my friend Bobby owned the Sega Genesis, and he either rented or bought or got the Sega CD. So one time when I was playing at his house, so I ended up running a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD one time and played this dog game. I think it was called like Mad Dog something. And I don't know, I remember shooting. It was a shooting game. There's like these bales of hay everywhere and stuff. But anyway, yeah, I bought the Sega Genesis in February 2022. A month later, I bought the Sega Dreamcast. I have not played the Dreamcast yet, it's still in the box. A month later, I bought the Sega Saturn. So yeah, every month, February, March, and April of 2022, I found 3 different Sega consoles. Sega Saturn I have hooked up and played. Did a couple games. And continued, been collecting games ever since. This is actually a picture of my shelves. Now, I could not get a picture of the whole thing, so I had to do it in sections and then piece it together on the computer. So these shelves all extend over here, but I don't have any games on them. That's why they're blank. But yeah, I got all my PS2 games, GameCube games, Wii games. Got all my NES games. I think I'm going to do another video of my game collection in January. I recently did one in June, but I decided this is something I want to make like an annual thing, maybe every year. So the best time to do it would be like beginning of every year. So, I mean, when I did my last video in June, I had 120 games. Now I got 139. So I mean, it's almost 20 more games I added to my collection, and I mean, I'll probably still buy a few more by then. You know, some weekends I just get on, I just randomly go out and buy some games. So yeah, I got my NES games on this shelf, and the shelf extends over here. NES games are my biggest collection. Got the NES Zapper. Super Nintendo. Now there is another shelf over here that's got maybe like 5 Super NES games on it, so I kind of missed the picture. And I got my Atari 26. Oh, Sega Genesis games first, then Atari 2600. Got my N64 games. I got end labels, which is pretty cool. You know, one person bashed me on Facebook about putting end labels in my games. It's like, hey, unless you want to come over to my house and tell me what each one of these games are, don't tell me how to collect my games, because I want to be able to see what each game is. I got my Nintendo Switch games here. Down here, oops. Down here I got Sony PlayStation games. Got some Atari 5200 games. Can't really see my Game Boy games, at least the tops of them, but yeah, this is another one where I kind of overlap picture over picture. So, well, I know it's a pretty long video, but that's my autobiography on my collecting video games. I wish I would have started my YouTube channel one day earlier than it would be 12/12/12, which I actually thought it was until I went just today. I went back and looked, realized my first video was on the 13th, so it was 12/13/12. So decided to do this extra bonus video. 10 years ago today, I created JsRetroVideoGames. Only got up to like 560, I think 565 subscribers right now. I think I could get a lot more subscribers if I put the effort in, but it's just something I do. Something I started as a hobby. I never really had any intentions of making money on it. I mean, I work a full-time job, so it's not like I really need the money. And I do work overtime quite a bit too. We were working back in 2021. I was late 2020, from September 2020 to like March 2021. I was working 56 hours a week. It was mandatory overtime, so yeah, I gained a lot of money in that period of time. 'Cause, I mean, I was making money, but didn't have time to spend it. And then just over the last 3 months, we were working 48 hours a week every week for like all of September, all of October. And I actually think we did some of August, all of September, all of October, all of November, and I don't think we worked overtime in December. But anyway, we got 3 more months of overtime there, so collected some more games. And I mean, I think some of the ideas I could do if I wanted to get more subscribers, do some 2-player games. You know, I'd have to get a second player. We could do some Mario Kart games. There's a lot of sport games I have. And I just think the videos would be more interesting when you got 2 people talking. Kind of like James and Mike Mondays. I mean, the thing I like most about those videos is the conversations. So I think having 2 people playing would make it much more interesting. Another game we could do, GoldenEye, Mortal Kombat games. So, I mean, it might be something I might look into doing someday. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that bonus video. Now, this isn't my only video for the week. I'll still be doing a video this Friday. I'll be uploading a video. And actually, I'm trying to think what game. I already had planned out what games I was going to do all month. I can't remember which one it was. It was either NES, Super NES, or Genesis. Now, I just did, the last video was Home Alone 2 on the Genesis. Oh, I think it might have been Mission Impossible on the NES was going to be my next one. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one Friday.